Welcome to Millennium Daytime Bulletin. I'm Shweta Simar from New Delhi and you're watching Millennium News Channel 24. Today I'm bringing you the latest updates from around the world. Let's begin with today's top headlines. Investigation highlights Israeli intelligence failure in lead up to Hamas October 7 attack. Kurdish separatist leader calls on followers to disarm, potentially ending a 5-decade insurgency with Turkey. Israel says it won't withdraw from Gaza-Egypt border as it sent team to ceasefire talks. Trump says United States will impose additional 10% tariff on China. Thailand deports dozens of Uyghurs to China despite torture fears. North Korea behind $1.5 billion hack of crypto exchange Bybit, says FBI. Trump says Putin would keep his word on a Ukraine peace deal. Markets stumble as tech stocks sink while commodities show mixed signals. Lewis Hamilton dismisses older white men criticizing his move to Ferrari. Pakistan cricket is gone now. Former fast bowler blames PCB officials for men in green's poor show. Now let's look at the details. An investigation into the failings of the Israeli military in the lead up to the devastating Hamas attack on October 7, 2023 has highlighted gaps in the intelligence gathering, flawed assumptions about Hamas, and systematic failures in the Israeli Defense Forces preparedness and response. The 19-page report released Thursday by the IDF said there were gaps in the intelligence directorate's understanding of the Hamas strategic goals, decision-making processes, and operational plans that contributed to the failure to stop the biggest terrorist attack in the country's history when gunmen killed more than 1,200 people and took more than 250 hostages. Also, despite having relevant information, the intelligence community failed to recognize Hamas' shift from a determined and pragmatic group to one actively planning a large-scale offensive, it said. The report said that as early as 2016, Hamas had begun preparing for a large-scale attack aimed at breaching the Gaza border, occupying Israeli territory, and causing mass casualties. It identified several instances where intelligence indicators such as Hamas training exercises and operational plans were misinterpreted or dismissed as unrealistic. These indicators, had they been properly analyzed, they could have revealed Hamas' intention, the report said. Hamas has deliberately created a false perception of seeking quiet while accelerating its military buildup, the report said, adding that by May 2023, the militant group had decided to carry out an attack during a Jewish holiday that would aim to shatter Israel's sense of security and potentially escalate into an all-out war aimed at destroying Israel. When the attack happened, the IDF was caught off guard by its scale and intensity, and its Gaza division, responsible for defending the border, was overrun within hours, leading to a collapse in command and control. The IDF response was hampered by a lack of situational awareness, delayed force mobilization, and insufficient deployment of troops and firepower, found the inquiry, which added that the IDF's readiness levels were inadequate for the scale of the attack. Israel's military chief of staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, who has said that he will resign in March over the failure to prevent the attack, addressed the finding in a televised speech, also acknowledging the military's failure and taking responsibility for the lapses. Kurdish militant leader Abdullah Öcalan has asked his follower in the Kurdistan Workers' Party, that is PKK, to lay down arms and dissolve the group, potentially ending a decade-long conflict with Turkey Turkey that is estimated to have killed at least 40,000 people. I'm making a call for the laying down of arms, and I take on the historical responsibility of this call, the jailed leader said in a statement on Thursday that was read by the Turkish lawmakers. All group must lay their arm and the PKK must dissolve itself. Öcalan said that for more than 1,000 years that Turkish and Kurdish relationship were defined in terms of mutual cooperation and alliance, which was broken in the last 200 years. Today, the main task is to restructure the historical relationship, which has been extremely fragile. Turkey has been at war with the PKK for almost 5 decades. Much of that conflict has focused on the group's desire to establish an independent Kurdish state in the country's southeast, but in the recent year, the group has called for more autonomy within the Turkey instead. There is no alternative to democracy in the pursuit of the realization of a political system. Democratic consensus in the fundamental way, also Öcalan said in the statement. He added that the PKK had gained support among Kurds in the past because the channel of democratic politics were close to them. In recent months, prospect of Kurdish-Turkish peace were recharged by an unusual overture from the far-right Turkish lawmaker Devlet Bahçeli, an ally of the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who invited Öcalan to come to the parliament and declared that he was to lay down the arms. Öcalan made a similar call to his followers a decade ago, but the 2013 peace process soon collapsed as tension reignited, dragging Turkey and PKK back into a bloody war and ending a 2-year ceasefire. Some experts say years of fighting has exhausted the PKK and that Erdogan is seizing the opportunity to end the conflict in a way that assures the Turkey emerges as a winner. Berke Madraki, a Turkey analyst of the International Crisis Group think tank in Brussels, said that Turkey was trying to end the conflict largely on its own term, adding that after a decade of heavy fighting, the group is significantly weakened. Ankara is pursuing a dual strategy, keeping up the military pressure while engaging in political maneuvering. It is yet to be seen what, if any, concessions the Erdogan government is willing to make to the PKK or Turkey's Kurds in return. Öcalan's statement could have also been having far-reaching regional implications, especially in Syria, where a PKK-affiliated Kurdish militia called the People's Protection Unit, that is the YPG, also forms the backbone of the Syrian Democratic Forces, that is SDF, the US-backed force that fought ISIS. Turkey-backed militants in the country have engaged in intense battles with the YPG since the overthrow of former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in December. It's unclear how a call for peace from Öcalan may resonate among the Kurdish militants in Syria and Iraq. Israel will not withdraw its forces from the Gaza-Egypt border as would be required under the second phase of a truce with Hamas. An Israeli source says even if it dispatches a team for ceasefire negotiations, we will not exit the Philadelphia corridor, referring to the 14 kilometers, that is 8-mile strip along the border. We will not allow Hamas murderers to roam again with trucks and rifles on our borders, and we will not let them strengthen themselves again through smuggling. The announcement comes days before the first phase of the Israeli-Hamas hostage ceasefire agreement is set to expire, and just hours after the Hamas handed over the final hostages due to release under the first phase. Hamas said in a statement that Israel's failure to withdraw from the Gaza-Egypt border would be a clear violation of the ceasefire agreement and an attempt to fabricate excuses to obstruct the ceasefire agreement and causing it to fail. Talks on extending the 42-day ceasefire between Israel and Hamas into a second phase were meant to have started more than 3 weeks ago. As tensions tensions in the region continue to run high. At least 9 people were injured Thursday in a car ramming attack in central Israel, according to emergency responders. 2 are in serious condition and 1 in critical condition, according to the local hospital. Israel police are investigating the incident as the terrorist attack and identified a 53-year-old Palestinian man as the attacker, saying he had been killed. Meanwhile, Israel has steadily escalated an intense military operation in Palestinian cities in the occupied West Bank, killing dozens and displacing tens of thousands of residents since the ceasefire agreement came into effect last month. Talk to continue in Cairo. The Israel Prime Minister office said Thursday that Benjamin Netanyahu was sending a negotiating delegation to Cairo today to continue the talks. It is unclear whether the team will discuss phase 2 of a ceasefire, which is supposed to include the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza or just an extension of the first phase. The delegation from Israel and Qatar arrived in Cairo Thursday night along with the American representatives to continue negotiations. Egypt's State Information Service said talks have started to discuss the next stages of the truce. It added, the first phase, which have been seeing the release of 38 hostages held by Hamas, 5 of whom were freed separately to the deal, and thousands of Palestinian prisoners and detainees held by Israel, expires on Saturday. Netanyahu would prefer to simply extend the ceasefire first phase and secure the release of more hostages without having to withdraw from Gaza, saying that the government is trying to prolong the first phase by as much possible in the hope of achieving that. Donald Trump said he planned to hit goods from China with a new 10% tariff, the latest salvo in the United States president's steadily increasing the escalating of the trade fights. Also, imports from China already face taxes at the border of at least 10% after a Trump tariff order that went into effect earlier this month. Trump also said Thursday he intended to move forward with the threatened 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico, which are set to come effect on 4th March. Also, his comments came as officials from the Mexico and Canada were in Washington for discussions aimed at heading off that plan. Trump had announced the plan for 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada for 4 February unless the two nations increased border security. He posed the measure for a month and at least a minute after the two countries agreed to increase border funding and talk more about how to combat drug trafficking. On social media on Thursday, Trump wrote that he did not think enough actions had been taken to address the flow of fentanyl to the United States. Drugs are still pouring into our country from Mexico and Canada at very high and unacceptable levels, he wrote, adding that a large percentage of the drugs were made in China. Mexico President Claudia Sheinbaum, at a press conference from the country's national palace, said in response, as of that we know Trump has his way of communicating. She added, I hope we can reach an agreement on the 4th of March. We can announce something else. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also said his country was working hard to reach a deal, warning tariffs from the United States would prompt an immediate and extremely strong response. Trump's threat against Mexico and Canada have raised widespread alarm as the North American economy is closely connected after decades of operating under a free trade agreement. Leaders of the two countries have previously said they would impose retaliatory tariffs on the United States if the White House went ahead with its plan. Tariffs are a tax collected by the government and paid for by the business bringing the goods into the country. China, Mexico, and Canada are America's top 3 trading partners, together accounting for more than 40% of imports into the United States last year. Economists have warned tariff on goods from the 3 countries could lead to higher prices in the United States on everything from iPhones to avocados. Dozens of Uyghurs have been deported from Thailand to China in the face of warning from the human rights experts that there is a high risk they will suffer torture, enforced disappearance, and imprisonment. Local media reported that several trucks with their windows covered were seen in the early hours of Thursday, leaving Bangkok Immigration Center, where 48 Uyghur have been held during the more than 10 years in the Thai detention center. A few hours later, at 4 o'clock in the morning, an unscheduled China Southern Airlines flight took off from Bangkok's Don Muang airport and it landed in the Kashgar in the China's Xinjiang region about 6 hours later. A video posted online showed handcuffed men being escorted off the China's Southern Airline plane. The Thai Deputy Prime Minister Phumtham Wechayachai also confirmed the deportation, telling Reuters that China had assured Thailand the 40 Chinese Uyghur it returned on Thursday would be looked after. It was done in accordance with Thai law and international principles. There are no problems. They will be looked after well before and because they are being there as people, Phumtham said. They are undergoing health checks. After that, they will be sent home. Their relatives have received them. China government had earlier announced that a group of 40 illegal immigrants had been repatriated from the Thailand. China Public Security Ministry said it attached great importance to their return and the repatriation was in line with the laws of China and Thailand and international practice. The security official did not mention the group were Uyghurs, but have many people who have commented on social media appeared to presume they were linked to these scam firms. Also, at a separate press conference, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian rejected criticism from the so-called human rights advocates and said all ethnic groups in China enjoyed rights and freedoms as Chinese citizens. Certain political forces have been spreading lies concerning Xinjiang in order to disrupt the order in Xinjiang. We are firmly opposed to such interference, he said. The Thai Prime Minister Puntotharn Shivantara said that only the law, international process and human rights must be followed. The 48 detainees were among hundreds of Uyghur who fled China in the late 2013 and early 2014, traveling to the southern East Asia with the help of people smugglers. Many of them hold and they were also told if they could make into the far as Malaysia and they could be resettled to Turkey. The groups were arrested in Thailand in 2014 and the following year 109 were sent back to China, prompting global outcry. Also, the photographs at the time showed some of them hooded, handcuffed and guarded by Chinese police. Others were sent to Turkey. North Korea was behind the theft of approximately $1.5 billion in virtual asset from a cryptocurrency exchange, the FBI has said, in what is being described as the biggest heist in the history. The haul, which reported has been seen as the value of exceeding the previous record of some $1 billion stolen by the dictator Saddam Hussein from the Iraq Central Bank before the 2003 war, and underlines the North's growing expertise in the cybercrime. Describing the particular form of North Korean malicious cyber activity as trader traitor, the FBI on Wednesday warned that the virtual asset stolen from Bybit, a Dubai-based cryptocurrency exchange platform, would eventually be turned into currency. Trader traitor actions are proceeding rapidly and have converted some of the stolen assets to Bitcoin and other virtual assets dispersed across thousands of addresses on multiple blockchains, said an FBI statement. The bureau added that it expected the assets would be further laundered and eventually converted to fiat currency, a normal government-backed currency that is not tied to commodities such as gold. North Korea is known to operate a sophisticated cybercrime unit known as the Lazarus Group that have been responsible for audacious theft whose proceeds are thought to have funded the regime's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Hackers linked to North Korea stole more than $1.3 billion in cryptocurrency in 2024, then a record amount, according to a report published in the late December. The theft was spread out over 47 incidents, the blockchain analysis firm Chain Analysis said, adding that the total was a dramatic jump from the $660 million seized in 2023. Hackers linked to North Korea have become notorious for their sophisticated and relentless tradecraft, often employing advanced malware, software, and social engineering and cryptocurrency theft to fund state-sponsored operation and circumvent the international sanctions, Chain Analysis said in the reports. Also, the UN officials monitoring sanctions imposed on the North Korea believe that the proceeds from dozens of suspected cyber attacks the regime carried out between 2013 and 23 were used to improve its nuclear weapon program. While his country's economy has been battered by sanctions, the COVID-19 pandemic and natural disaster, Kim Jong-un has in recent years overseen significant improvement to North Korea's potential to strike distant targets, including the US mainland. Cybercrime is not the only means by which the regime earns foreign currency. Kim regime has supplied weapons, ammunition, and troops to support the Russian invasion of Ukraine in exchange for cash and technological know-how. South Korea's spy agency claimed on Thursday that Pyongyang had sent more soldiers to Russia, with some deployed to the front line in Kursk, in addition to about 11,000 North Korean troops already thought to be in the Russian border region. Donald Trump has insisted that Vladimir Putin would keep his word on a peace deal for Ukraine, arguing that the United States workers extracting critical minerals in the country would act as a security backstop to deter Russia from invading again. During highly anticipated talks at the White House with the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the United States President said that the Putin could be trusted not to breach any agreement which could aim to return as much of the land as possible to Ukraine that was seized by Russia during the brutal 3-year conflict. Also, but the sitting alongside Starmer in the Oval Office taking questions from journalists, Trump refused to commit to deploying US forces to support a European-led peacekeeping force, although he said United States would always help the British military in the unlikely event it needed it. Also, he later indicated the United States would make great trade agreements with the United Kingdom that could progress very quickly, adding that Starmer had tried to persuade him with imposing tariffs, saying he earned whatever the hell they pay him over there. The United States President also appeared to make a significant concession on the Chagos Island, saying that he was inclined to back the deal struck by Starmer, who at the talks delivered a letter from the King Charles offering Trump an unprecedented second state visit. Also, the relationship between the two men appeared convivial, and were for much the meeting that Trump praised Starmer as an outstanding person and a very social person. The talk came as the most precarious moment for the European security in the decades, as the new US administration aligns with Russia, breaking a years-long transatlantic consensus on the Ukraine. The Prime Minister used the meeting just 24 hours before Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky travels to Washington to sign a critical mineral deal to push the president on providing security protection for Kyiv in the events of peace deal being secured to deter Russia from launching another attack. Now bringing you latest updates on today's market trend. Markets across North America face sharp declines, with the major United States indices suffering significant losses. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped by 193.62 points, while the broader S&P 500 declined 94 points. The Nasdaq, heavily weighed with technology stocks, took the hardest hit, plunging 530 points, signaling a major sell-off in the technological sector. Small cap stocks also struggled as the Russell 2000 lost 34.51 points, that is 1.59% decline. Investors' uncertainty was reflected in the volatility index, that is the VIX index, that surged 10.63% to 21.13, indicating rising market fear and risk aversion. The downturn suggests concerns over the interest rate, economic data, or upcoming economic reports, prompting investors to adopt a risk-off approach. Canadian market followed suit with S&P TSX Composite falling to 200.12 points, that is 0.79% drop, and the S&P TSX 60 dropping 10.55 points, that is 0.69% drop, driven by weakness in energy and financial sectors. Latin America market had mixed performance. Brazil's Bovespa inched up 30.25 points, that is 0.02% increase, showing resilience despite global declines. Chile's S&P IPSA climbed 41.79 points, that is 0.57% rise, while Mexico's S&P BMV IPC fell sharply by 689 points, reflecting broader market pessimism. With the market volatility on the rise, investors will be closely watching economic indicators, Federal Reserve signals, and corporate earnings for direction in the coming days. The commodities market experienced a day of mixed movement, with energy and metal largely declining, while the agricultural shows some resilience. Also of the crude oil prices that slipped as the WTI crude oil fell by $0.31 to $70, while the Brent crude oil dropped 0.30 to $73.74. The decline in the oil prices could reflect demand concerns, potential oversupply, or macroeconomic factors weighing on energy markets. Natural gas also edged lower, shedding $0.02 and $3.92, staying with the lower end on its 52-week range. Warmer weather forecast and lower than expected demand may have contributed to the decline. Precious metal weakened as gold lost $4.30, settling at $2,891, and silver dropped 0.23% to reach $31.88. The pullback in metal could be linked to a stronger dollar or shift in investor sentiment away from the safe haven assets. On the agricultural side, soya beans provided a bright spot, rising to $10.41. The gain in the soybean prices could be driven by the supply chain concerns, global demand, on weather conditions affecting crop yields. With energy and metal under pressure, investors will be closely watching economic indicators, central bank policies, and geopolitical developments for the further direction in the commodities market. We'll be right back after a short break. I'm Shweta Simar from New Delhi. Keep watching Millennium Daytime Bulletin.
Millennium TV, bridging communities worldwide. We broadcast diverse international content from Europe, Asia, Africa, and now right here in the USA. Watch us via Roku on your smart TV. Download the Millennium TV app from the App Store to stream our shows anywhere, anytime. Millennium TV.
Welcome back after the break. I'm Shweta Simar and you're watching Millennium Daytime Bulletin. Now let's look at some sports highlights. Lewis Hamilton has delivered a stinging rebuke to criticism of his move from Mercedes to Ferrari, dismissing it as an irrelevance from what he describes as older white men. Hamilton is making his debut with the Ferrari this year and is currently taking part in pre-season testing in Bahrain, where he was quickest in the morning session on Thursday. This will be the 40-year-old's 19th session in Formula One and comes after 12 years at Mercedes, with whom he won 6 of his 7 titles. Speaking in an interview for Time magazine, he addressed criticism he has received from the former F1 team chief Eddie Jordan and the sports former chief executive Bernie Ecclestone. Also, I've always welcomed the negatively. Also, he has welcomed the negativity, he said in the interview. I never ever reply to any of the older, ultimately white men who have commented on my career and what they think I should be doing. How you show up, how you present yourself, how you perform slowly dispels that. Jordan questioned the wisdom of Ferrari signing Hamilton and letting Carlos Sainz go to bring him in. Similarly, Ecclestone queried Hamilton's motivation and stated he doubted the British driver would see out even 2 years at the Scuderia. Legendary Pakistani fast bowler Sarfaraz Nawaz has blamed the Pakistani Cricket Board, that is PCB, and its officials for the poor state of Pakistan cricket at present times. According to the 76-year-old former cricketer, Pakistan cricket is gone now, and it is because of the bureaucrats who are running the cricket board. The 76-year-old bowling great says the PCB officials have no idea about cricket and they have picked people who previously played to the Pakistan cricket. I watch closely and on and off I write to the PCB chairman, who is Mohsin Naqvi, because he doesn't know much about cricket. I suggested things to him, but it's up to him what he does. Pakistan cricket is gone now. I think it's because of all the PCB officials running the board. They are non-cricketers, they are bureaucrats. That's why I think that they don't know anything about cricket. They have picked people who previously destroyed Pakistan cricket, and they are frequent changes in the PCB. Within a year and a half, there are 3 chairmen and 4 captains. What else do you expect? It was a one-sided game because the Pakistan team was not preparedly and properly selected. That's all for now. Thank you for tuning in. Stay with us for more updates. Log in to stay updated with the latest news on our social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Millennium News 24. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel, Millennium News 24. You can watch us on Android and iOS devices, as well as on Apple TV, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, and all smart TV platforms. Enjoy entertainment and latest news with us. Download Millennium TV app, Millennium TV USA for Android, and Millennium News on Google. Thank you for being part of Millennium News Channel 24.